The Lona, Trail of Blood, Chapter 25 and 26. Arturo was still waiting in the clump of cottonwoods where the kid had left him. When he rode up a short time later, Arturo put the rifle he'd been holding across his lap in the back of the buckboard. I noticed what looked like quite a bit of smoke rising in the direction of Albalon a while ago. I suppose you were reasonable for that, kid? Well, sort of, the kid said with a smile. But mainly it was the fault of the fella who with the dynamite. Dynamite? Arturo repeated. The kid nodded. Yeah, the one who blew up the jail. I see. Arturo paused. Is Marshal Fisher all right? Yeah, I got there in time to give him a hand. Those men of Elam's won't bother him anymore. Unfortunately, he no longer has a prisoner to turn over to the sheriff. The explosion sort of took care of that problem, too. Well, that simplifies matters for the marshal, I suppose. I'll take it we'll be continuing on to Powderhorn as planned. The kid nodded. That's right. Are you ready to go? Arturo lifted the reins. Of course, but he didn't put the team into motion right away. I was quite glad to see you ride up, sir. I would have gone on without you, but I was hoping that wouldn't be necessary. You have tried to find my kids on your own? Certainly, Arturo answered without hesitation. They are the children of Conrad Browning. They need to know that. They need to receive the legacy that would be coming to them. A warm feeling filled the kid's chest. He smiled, nodded. I'm obliged to you for that, amigo. Isn't that Spanish for friend, isn't it? Yes, it is. When evening came, the kid led the way about half a mile off the road before he found a good place to camp. He wasn't expecting trouble, but it never hurt to be careful about picking a place to spend the night. In the morning, they pushed on toward Powderhorn. They encountered several cowboys on horseback and a farming family in a run-down wagon. None of those pilgrims had represented any threat. Around mid-morning, the kid spotted travelers up ahead on the road, heading toward East Albalon. He reined in and motioned for Arturo to stop as well. Something about the riders coming toward them struck the kid as different. For one thing, there were half a dozen men on horses accompanying a black buggy. As the distance narrowed, the kid saw that only one man sat in the buggy, handling the reins. Let's get out of their way, Arturo. Is that rifle of yours still handy? I'll get it out of the back and put it on the floorboard, Arturo said as he lifted the reins and drove the wagon off the trail. Put it on the seat beside you where it's handy, the kid advised. Go ahead and lever around into the chamber. Arturo looked worried, but readied his rifle. The kid moved his black saddle horse and a packed mule aside from the trail as well, tying the mule's reins to the back of the buckboard. Then he slid his Winchester from its sheath and laid it across the saddle in front of him. By that time, the travelers were close enough. The kid recognized the hawk-like nose and drooping mustache of Jim Mundy, the gunman who, according to Marshal Fisher, was Court Elam's segundo. More than likely, that made Elam the man and the buggy, the kid thought. The rest of the riders were typical hard cases, like the other members of Elam's gun crew the kid had seen. He could make a guess why Elam and some of his men were on their way to Albalon. As the group neared the spot where the kid and Arturo waited, Mundy scowled in recognition. He moved his horse closer to the buggy, and said something to the driver. It came as no surprise to the kid when the man hauled back on the reins and brought the vehicle to a halt. The riders reined in and arranged their horses 3 on each side of the buggy, with Monday closest on the right. The man in the buggy regarded the kid with a cool stare. He was in his 40s, the kid judged, but already had iron gray hair under his expensive brown Stetson. His brown tweed suit had cost plenty, as had the diamond stick pin in his Corvette. He was lean in face and body, with watchful, deep-set eyes. "You're the man called Morgan," he said as he looked at the kid. It wasn't a question. "That's right," the kid said with a nod. "And you be Court Elam." The man smiled thinly. "You've heard of me, I see." "Heard plenty. None of it good." Monday's brow darkened as he leaned forward slightly in his saddle. His hand moved an inch or so toward the butt of his gun. Elam lifted a hand and motioned for Monday to take it easy. It was a casual gesture, as if Elam knew it would be obeyed instantly and without hesitation. "We're not looking for any trouble, Mr. Morgan," Elam said. "We're on a sad errand this morning. Some of my employees met an untimely end yesterday, as you well know. I'm on my way to Albaline to make the final arrangements for them." The kid grunted. "Fitting, since you sent them there to die." Elam's narrow face hardened slightly. With a faint, solemn smile, he said, "Just because a man's employees do something doesn't mean that he ordered them to do it. Sometimes they do exactly the opposite of what he might wish." "Are you saying they came to Albaline on their own?" That was what Fisher believed had happened, the kid reminded himself. "That's right," Elam said. "Sometimes men will get carried away when a friend of theirs is in trouble and do something unwise." "How'd you find out what happened?" Still wearing that same shadow of a smile, Elam said, "Well, I'm not sure that it's any of your business, but Marshal Fisher notified me of the tragedy." Fisher might do that, the kid thought. Fisher might send a telegram to Elam and Powderhorn telling him to come get the bodies of his hired guns. But Fisher probably wouldn't have gone into detail about the kid's part in the events of the previous day. He suspected Elam had spies in Albaline, or at least friends who could have given him the whole story. Tension was thick in the air. Monday and the gunman looked coldly at the kid, and he knew they wanted to slap leather and blow him out of the saddle. Elam's presence was the only thing keeping them from doing exactly that. Like all businessmen, honest and crooked alike, he knew the secret of success was waiting for just the right moment to make his move. He also had sense enough to realize if lead started flying, he would be in the way of the kid's first shots. "You and your friend appear to be bound for Powderhorn, Mr. Morgan. Is that the case?" "It might be," the kid allowed. "If you're there for any amount of time, we'll probably run into each other again. I own a number of businesses in the settlement." "Maybe so. Right now, though, we have to get on to Albaline. We have an unpleasant chore awaiting us." Elam inclined his head in a lazy nod. "So long." He flicked the reins against the back of the buggy horse. The kid didn't say anything as Elam got the vehicle moving again. He sat there stolidly as the gunman rode past, sending hostile looks his way. The Winchester stayed where it was on the saddle in front of him as the group from Powderhorn moved on. "I was convinced they were going to kill us," Arturo said from the buckboard behind the kid. "They thought about trying, but Elam knew he'd be the first one to die if they did." Arturo brought the buckboard up even with the kid. I'll never become accustomed to this, you know. You'd be surprised what a man can get used to when he doesn't have any other choice. Arturo didn't argue the point as they continued on their way to Powder Point. They didn't stop for lunch since the kid thought they were getting pretty close to the settlement. It was only a little after 1 o'clock in the afternoon when he spotted a church steeple up ahead, along with the roofs of several buildings and a smudge of green indicating the presence of trees planted, watered, and cared for by humans since the Kansas prairie was largely treeless. As they drew closer, the kid looked for a building big enough to be used as an orphanage, figuring such an institution would be located on the outskirts of town. He didn't see one. The railroad tracks curved toward the settlement. A red brick depot building stood at the southern end of the main street, which ran due north for half a dozen blocks to a wooden bridge that spanned a creek. The stream's Mandarin Path formed Powderhorn's northern boundary. The kid had no idea how the town had gotten its name. He didn't see any physical features that reminded him of a powderhorn. The trail turned into a road that ran along the front of the depot. Main Street dead-ended into it on the kid's right as he and Arturo approached the station. Even before they turned onto Main Street, the kid saw a warehouse on the far corner. A sign with Elam's Freight Company painted on it hung on the front of the building. On the other side of the warehouse was a large barn and corral. The sign on it read Elam Freight Lines. The kid supposed Elam had merchandise shipped in by train, stored it in a warehouse belonging to Elam Freight Company, and delivered it in wagons belonging to the Elam Freight Lines to settlements that went on the railroad line. That was a handy arrangement. It didn't end there, however. The kid and Arturo also passed Elam's Larry Stable, Elam's General Mercantile Store, and Elam's Prairie Belle Saloon. Across the street stood the Elam Hotel. The kid was getting good and sick of that name. Mr. Elam certainly wasn't exaggerating, was he? Arturo said. How do you Americans put it? He appears to own half the town. At least, the kid said. He saw a building on the left with the words Marshal's Office on a sign that hung from the wooden awning over the boardwalk, and couldn't help but wonder if the man who occupied that office was Elam's marshal. He would be surprised if it didn't turn out to be the case. Deciding to start his search there, he angled toward the hitch rail in front of the lawman's office, and Arturo followed. The kid sprung down from the saddle and looped the black reins around the rail. You might as well stay here until I find out something, he told Arturo. No need for you to climb up and down if you don't have to. Very well. Arturo took off his hat and pulled a handkerchief from his pocket to pat beads of sweat off his forehead while the kid went to the door of the marshal's office. The door was locked, he discovered when he tried the knob, and no one responded to his knocks on it. A stocky man ambling along the boardwalk stopped to watch him for a moment before asking, You looking for the marshal, mister? The kid suppressed a surge of irritation. It was obvious what he was doing, he thought. That's right. Do you know where he is? Sure do. The man didn't volunteer any more information, so once again the kid had to hold his temper. Can you tell me where to find him? Yup. For a second, the kid thought the local was going to force him to ask again. But then the man went on. You see the church up at the end of town on the other side of the street? I see it, the kid said. Go on around back and you'll find the cemetery. That's where the marshal is. Just look for the tombstone that has "Here lies a damn fool" carved on it. Chapter 26. The townsman appeared to be completely serious. He was short and thick and had a close cropped gray beard. His clothes were stained and had a definite odor of manure about them, which told the kid the man probably worked in a livery stable. "You mean the marshal is dead?" "That's right. What happened to him? And I don't mean the business about him being a damn fool." The man shrugged. "He took his job too serious like. Tried to keep the peace one night when he should have just let it go. He knew good and well the law only gets enforced a certain way around here, or at least he should have. And Court Elam decides what way that is," the kid guessed. "Who killed the marshal? Jim Mundy or another of Elam's gun wolves? Mister, I don't know you, and I said all I'm gonna say. Probably more than I should have." The kid noticed that Powderhorn didn't appear to be a very busy place. Only a few people were on the boardwalks, and just a handful of horses were tied up at the hitch rails. Is everybody taking a siesta, or do Elam and his men have folks so scared they won't come out of their homes and businesses unless they have to? The man shook his head. "Like I told you, I ain't saying anything else. I got to get back to work." At the Elam livery stable, the man had started to brush past the kid, but he stopped and frowned. "A man's got to eat, and so does the rest of his family. You can work for somebody without agreeing with everybody he does. If it wasn't you holding down that job, it'd be somebody else." "That's a convenient way to think," the kid said, not bothering to keep the scorn out of his voice. The man's already face flushed a deeper shade of red. Instead of angry words, though, he said quietly, "You ain't from around here, mister. You don't know how it is. You can answer one more question for me. I told you, where can I find Mrs. Shanley's orphanage?" The kid's words cut through the locals' protest. The man looked surprised by the question. His eyes widened for a second, then narrowed in suspension. "Why do you want to know? You and your friend in the buggy there don't look like orphans to me. As a matter of fact, both of my parents are deceased," Arturo said. "But it happened a long time ago. So, I don't really think of myself as an orphan. And my father's still alive," the kid said. "As far as I know," he added to himself, as perilous a life as Frank Morgan led, he supposed he couldn't make that exception. The livery man said, "I don't really care. I don't mix in things that don't concern me. And that Shanley woman and her blamed orphans are one of them." With a hostile glare, he walked up down the street toward the stable. "Well, he was certainly an unhelpful fellow," Arturo said. "Not completely. He told us more about how things are around here. Not very good from the sound of it. Elam and his men have this town treed. But by that you mean everyone is afraid of them." "Yeah." The kid looked up the street and rubbed his chin. "I'm curious why he didn't want to say anything about the orphanage. That doesn't seem like something would get anybody in trouble." He untied the black reins, but didn't mount up, leading the gelding up the street. Arturo brought the buckboard alongside him. "Where are we going, kid?" "To see somebody who maybe won't mind telling us about the orphanage." The kid angled across the street toward the church. There's a whitewashed frame building with a square bell tower that had a tall wooden steeple on top. As he looked along the side of the building, he saw the fenced graveyard behind it. A few small cottonwood trees provided shade, where the citizens of Powderhorn who had passed on had been laid to rest. It put him in mind of another cemetery located in a small town in New Mexico. As the kid's mouth tightened into a grim line, he put those thoughts out of his mind. It wouldn't do to think too much about the woman who was buried there, even though he would never forget her or the happiness she had brought him, or the scars her murder had seared into his soul. As the kid tied the black reins to the buckboard, Arturo asked, "Shall I come with you, sir?" "That'd be fine." They stepped into the church and walked through a small foyer into the sanctuary. It was colder outside, out of the sun. "Hello?" the kid called. The word echoed back from the stained glass windows and the high ceiling. "Up here!" a voice said from behind and above them. The kid turned and looked into the foyer, where a narrow door stood open a few inches. He opened it more and saw a ladder propped inside the tiny room. Light spilled through an open trapdoor at the top of the ladder. It led up into the bell tower, the kid thought. "Wait there and I'll be right down," the same voice said. A moment later, a man's shape blocked off the light coming through the trapdoor. He started climbing down the ladder. When he reached the bottom, he stepped off and brushed his hands together. "I was working on the bell," he explained with a smile. "On the rope, actually. It was getting rather frayed. Wouldn't do to have it snap some Sunday morning while I'm ringing the bell to summon the faithful to services." "No, I suppose not," the kid said. "Are you the pastor here?" The man nodded. "That's right." He was young, no more than 25, with a friendly, slightly rounded face and brown hair. He wore a pair of corduroy trousers and a work shirt with the sleeves rolled up over his forearms. "Thomas Kellogg." "Pleased to meet you, Reverend." The minister shook his head. "Please, no Reverend. Just Tom is fine, or Brother Tom if you insist. I saw you gentlemen ride into town." With a grin, he pointed a thumb up at the steeple. "There's a good view from up there, you know. In a land as flat as this, you can see a long way from any sort of elevation." "I'm sure you can," the kid said. "We were hoping you could tell us where to find a lady named Shamley." "Mrs. Shamley who runs the orphanage?" Instantly, the amiable expression disappeared from Kellogg's face, and his eyes and tone became guarded. "Why do you want to know?" "I need to ask her about something." "And who are you, exactly?" The kid kept a tight rein on his impatience. "They called me Kid Morgan." That was the literal truth. He didn't want to lie to a man of God. Kellogg surprised him by asking, "Not the Kid Morgan, the one in the dime novels?" The kid had heard the old saying about life imitating art. In his case, it was more complicated than that. When he had decided to let everyone believe for a while that Conrad Browning was dead, he had hidden his true identity behind a new name. And choosing that name, he had considered the fact that authors working for publishing companies back east had written dime novels about his father, Frank Morgan. From there it had begun a natural leap to calling himself Frank Morgan. Very few people actually knew that Frank was his father, so he didn't think the name would give him away. However, he had never expected that he would become well known enough, quickly enough to inspire dime novels about him. Eventually, those yellow-back novels had an avid readership that was always hungry for more heroes, more adventures. The kid had seen a few of the Kid Morgan books and been baffled and amused by them. Seeing his reaction, Kellogg hurried on. "Oh, I know a preacher is not really supposed to read such things, but they're so exciting, and from time to time, they teach good moral lessons. I mean, good always triumphs over evil in the end, doesn't it? And dime novels, maybe," the kid said, again trying not to think about Rebel. "Well, it's really an honor to meet you," Kellogg said as he shook hands with the kid. Then he grew more serious. "But I'd still like to know what your business is with Teresa. I mean, Mrs. Shamley." If he was going to trust anybody, the kid told himself, it ought to be a preacher. "I'm looking for some children." "She has quite a few," Kellogg frowned. "Although I'm not sure that a man himself, such as yourself. I mean a man with no permanent place of residence, I mean." The minister was starting to look really frustrated. "You mean a drifting gunfire is not really the sort of man you think would want to adopt an orphan? Kellogg nodded. No offense intended, but yes, that thought did cross my mind. I'm not planning to adopt. I'm looking for 2 children, a boy and a girl, twins, between 3 and 4 years old. Again, in all good conscience, I have to pry into something that may not be any of my business. It's not, the kid cut in. But I'll tell you anyway. I don't have to adopt those children. They're already mine. I'm their father. For a long moment, Kellogg didn't say anything. Finally, he asked, "Where is the mother?" "Dead," the kid said. "Do you know if Mrs. Shanley has them?" Kellogg waved a hand. "I've only been the pastor here for a year and a half, Mr. Morgan. Before that, I was in Springfield, Missouri. There are several children of their age in Mrs. Shanley's care, but I don't know how they came to be with her or if any of them are brother and sister. I can tell you that I've never noticed any twins among them. Fraternal twins don't always look that much alike," the kid pointed out. "Oh, so they're fraternal twins?" The kid took a deep breath. I don't know, it bothered him to admit that. It bothered Kellogg too. "You expect me to believe these children belong to you, and you don't even know if they're identical twins?" "It's a long story," the kid snapped. "Are you going to tell me where to find the orphanage or not?" Kellogg didn't answer the question directly. "You know, when I first saw the 2 of you come into town, I thought maybe you were some more of Mr. Elam's men." Arturo said, "Do I look like a hired gunman to you, sir?" Kellogg shrugged. "I'll admit you don't. Who are you?" "I work for the kid here. I'm his Batman, as the British call it." When Kellogg looked baffled by that answer, Arturo added, "His valet, assistant, call it what you will." That just confused the minister more. A gunfighter's got a valet? The kid tried not to get too exasperated. "Another long story. Please, Brother Tom. The children I'm looking for may not be Mrs. Shanley, but I have to be sure. Just tell me where to find her place, if you will." "I'll do better than that," Kellogg said with an abrupt nod, as if he had made up his mind about something. "I'll take you there. I'll be obliged for your help. If I can help unite a father with some lost children, well, that's just one more way of doing the Lord's work as I see it. Nobody's going to argue with you there," the kid said. "It's an easy walk," Kellogg said as he led them out of the church. Up here and around the corner on 5th Street, the houses of Powderhorn citizens were on the cross streets. Kellogg took them to one that rose 3 stories with a gabled roof and trees growing around it. It would have been a stern, forbidding-looking place without the flower beds in front of it and the bright curtains in the window. On his way into town, the kid had been looking for some ugly, institutional-appearing building, probably of stone or brick. He wouldn't have picked out that place as an orphanage. It looked more like the private home of a well-to-do businessman. Mrs. Shanley and her husband were some of the original settlers in Powderhorn, Tom Kellogg explained as he, the kid, and Arturo went through a gate in a whitewashed picket fence around the front yard. He had said something to do with the railroad, and he also established a very successful store here. But then a fever came through the area, recorded, and passed away. So did the Shanley's children. Since Mrs. Shanley was left alone, she took in the children of the families where both parents had died of the fever. That's how the orphanage got started. At least that's the way I've heard the story. I didn't live here then, you know, but I have no reason to doubt that it's true. Neither did the kid. He felt his heart pounding harder as the 3 of them went up the walk to the front porch. His son and daughter could be in there, only a few yards away from him. "I'm surprised the kids aren't out playing," he commented, more to have something to say than anything else. "The younger ones are napping, the older ones are studying. Teresa insists on a good education." Kellogg knocked on the door frame. A moment passed and then the door swung open. The fact that Kellogg had a habit of referring to Mrs. Stradley by her given name should have warned him. The kid thought, and so should have the preacher's comment about her own children dying of the fever. But in his anxiousness to find out if his kids were there, he hadn't considered those things, and so he was surprised to see that the woman standing in the doorway with a smile on her face was a beautiful blonde who couldn't be any more than 30 years old.